The wind whipped across the jagged gray stones, carrying nothing but the taste of dry dust. Daniel and Marcus stood at the very edge of the plot, the ground beneath them cracked and unyielding. Marcus kicked a loose rock, watching it bounce into the hollow silence of the field. He turned his back on the expanse, shoving his hands deep into his pockets. "This is a graveyard for seeds," Marcus said, his voice flat and hard. "Grandfather left us nothing but dirt and labor." He gestured at the horizon, where the sun beat down on the parched earth. Daniel did not answer immediately. He knelt, pressing his palm flat against the dry soil. He felt the grit bite into his skin. "The soil is tired," Daniel replied, his voice steady, "but it is not dead." He stood up, his eyes fixed on the empty expanse. One brother saw only the end of a legacy, while the other began to measure the depth of the earth. The sun had barely crested the hills when Daniel arrived with a heavy iron pickaxe. He swung the tool into the hard-packed ground, the metal ringing sharply against the buried stones. Each strike sent a jolt through his arms, but he did not stop. He pried the jagged rocks loose one by one, stacking them into a low wall that began to outline the field. Sweat beaded on his forehead, dripping into the dust as he worked. By mid-morning, he was hauling buckets of water from the river, his shoulders straining under the weight of the wooden yoke. Neighbors leaned over their fences, pointing and whispering. Daniel ignored them, his focus locked on the next trench. A few yards away, Marcus sat on his porch, watching the spectacle with a deep, permanent scowl. He spent his hours sharpening a knife he never used. When the wind blew dust, Marcus retreated inside and locked the door. Weeks bled into months, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. Daniel's hands grew thick with calluses, the skin stained dark and permanent by the earth. He dug irrigation trenches with a rhythmic, mechanical precision, his back muscles tightening and releasing in a constant cycle. He spent his nights studying the soil composition, mixing in compost he hauled from the village edge, and shielding the first fragile, pale sprouts from the searing midday sun. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on the field. Every morning, he checked the rows. Every evening, he hauled more water, his boots sinking into the mud he had created from nothing. The surface remained stubbornly gray, a vast, cracked expanse that seemed to mock his persistence. He felt the grit under his fingernails even when he slept. Daniel did not look up. He kept his eyes on the dirt, his movements steady, his resolve hardening against the lack of visible results. The change did not arrive with a storm. It happened in the quiet of a single morning. A single, vibrant green shoot pushed through the cracked surface, defying the dry earth. It stood straight, a sharp needle of life against the gray. By noon, the soil began to shift. Another shoot broke through, then a dozen, then hundreds. The transformation accelerated, a relentless surge of vitality that reclaimed the plot. Within days, the barren expanse vanished beneath a carpet of deep emerald leaves. Rows of heavy, red tomatoes hung from the vines, their weight pulling the stems toward the ground. The scent of blooming flowers flooded the air, thick and sweet, completely erasing the smell of dust and stagnant heat. The garden became a riot of color, a living wall of green and gold that seemed to pulse with energy. The townspeople gathered at the fence, their previous whispers replaced by a heavy, stunned silence. They leaned forward, eyes wide, unable to reconcile the lush paradise. Before them, with the wasteland they had watched for months, no one spoke. The wind moved through the leaves, creating a soft, rhythmic rustle that replaced the harsh scraping of stone. The plot was no longer a graveyard. It was a harvest. Daniel stood in the center of the rows, his hands resting on his hips, watching the life he had forced from the dirt. Marcus stepped across the boundary, his boots sinking into the soft, dark earth. He looked at the heavy vines, then down at his own empty, calloused, free hands. The silence of the garden was absolute. "How did you do this?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. Daniel wiped his brow, leaving a streak of soil across his forehead. He pointed to the dirt beneath their feet. "The land was never the problem," Daniel said. "The mindset was." He plucked a ripe tomato and held it out, a weight of red life in his palm. Marcus stared at the fruit, then back at his own barren plot across the fence. The sun dipped low, casting long, sharp shadows over the rows. The difference was not in the soil or the rain, but in the choice made every morning. Marcus stood still, the weight of the realization settling in the quiet air. One brother had waited for the world to change, while the other had simply reached down and changed it himself.